Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of On the Grid Podcast, Season 5, Episode 8. We are on race week. When we're recording this, it's for Sunday evening, a week before the Australian Grand Prix gets underway. But when you guys hearing this, it will be race weekend time, likely to be on the Thursday or the Friday that you guys will be listening to this episode. But it's race week, it's race time. Um, I'm your host, Adrian Keita. Joining me as ever is my co-host, Ethan Evans. Ethan, how are you feeling? It's good to be back. Race time is upon us. We've waited so long and it's finally upon us.
Oh, it's been a long few months, hasn't it? But yeah, like you said, it is almost upon us. Only a few days to go. And yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, so as you probably find out, this episode we will be looking and dissecting our way into the Australian Grand Prix, the season opener. The first time in a long while, I think that Australia has been used as a season opener because we've had Bahrain used as the usual season opener, and then we've had obviously Saudi Arabia on the back of that. But obviously, those few races have been moved back in the season calendar, and are being utilised as a triple header. But let's look into some news, shall we? Um, and it's been officially announced, that Cadillac will be joining the 2026 grid. Um, we've obviously talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but the official announcement has dropped that Cadillac will be joining the grid for 2026, making it an 11 team field for the first time since I want to say like 2012 or 13, because I can remember we had a 22 driver field. I can't quite remember. I might have to do a little bit of digging to see when was the last time the last time was when we had 22 drivers and 11 teams on the grid. But Ethan, two new race seats are opening up. F1 have already tweeted their the little graphic of 2026 driver lineup. Silly season is already starting. What have you made though of Cadillac's slash General Motors' entry onto the grid in 2026?
Well, I think there's been murmurings for a long time, hasn't there? I think it's just the same application in a different form. It was supposed to be Andretti. They didn't get the approval, so they've reworked it into a different format. It's still American based. It's still supported by General Motors, so it's good to have an extra team on the grid. But yeah, I think if anything, it does actually underline the need to update the current point scoring system. Because if you've got 22 drivers fighting for points and only 10 of them getting it's a little bit outdated, in my view. Maybe it needs to be extended to 15, and that will give you a good opportunity to do so with more cars coming onto the grid.
I've actually had a little bit of digging, and I think the last time we had 22 drivers on the grid was 2016. So exactly 10 years to the date where the last time we had 11 teams on the grid was 2016. Talking obviously about the race seats. Let's 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 have a look who could be in contention. Obviously, we've got a couple of drivers that are out from the sport this season, like your Valtteri Bottas, your Sergio Perez, Daniel Ricciardo, Zhou Guan Yu, or we could maybe Kevin Magnussen as well. Or we could maybe chuck in a few outsourced ones, like your F2 drivers, like Ayumu Iwasa is without a seat. Does he make the jump to Cadillac, for example? Or whether Cadillac will kind of have a more American based approach and get some drivers from maybe your NASCARs, your Indy cars. Ethan, who do you think are the main sort of favourites to fill those two seats? And who do you think is likely to have an opportunity at even making a way back to Formula One or making their first appearance in Formula One?
Well, I would say that the smart thing to do would be to get an experienced driver and a junior driver, maybe. So you look at, I think the standout candidate from a marketability point of view, which is important for a new team, I think, is Daniel Ricciardo. He obviously brings the popularity, he brings the eyes, and bring a lot of attention to the team. So I think that will be he'll be a strong candidate um, to get back on the grid, obviously, as well. And then they might go a bit left field. They might go for someone from America to bring that American fan base as well. So maybe a Pato Ward and Alex Palau, one of those drivers from IndyCar, from NASCAR that could fit into that. So it'll be interesting to see what avenue they go down. They might instead go down to look at some of the promising talent coming through F2 and F3. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. I do think they're going to have that balance of an experienced driver and a younger driver. It tends to be what teams go for, but we'll wait and see.
Let's move towards more of a news finally ahead of the Australian Grand Prix. Max Verstappen has gone out in the news and said that he rules out Red Bull out of contention for victory in Australia. Does this even sort of state that Red Bull aren't going to be fighting for, let's say, the victories that they did last season? Do you think that Red Bull could potentially experience a bit of turbulence and a few woes here and there? Because obviously they've announced departing from the team. A big figure is obviously Jonathan Wheatley, Adrian Newey as well. Do you think that those two departures will make a massive impact in the team sort of chance and fight for wins and podiums this season?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's going to be a struggle for them. I still think they will be fighting for wins over the course of the season. You've got to think that they can get it together at some point. But I think in the immediate, they could struggle. They could be the fourth fastest team when we rock up to Melbourne. You just don't know. So it will be interesting to see how they got on. Obviously, maybe Max Verstappen's sort of playing the game a little bit. He's downplaying their chances because then if they can pop up with a podium, for example, then that's not going to go amiss, is it? I don't think they're going to be the quickest team, possibly at any point this season. I think McLaren are clearly the quickest. And then you've got a battle for second between Ferrari, who I would slightly edge over Mercedes and Red Bull. But I imagine them to be in the mix, especially with someone of Max Verstappen's quality.
Do you then think that Max Verstappen is simply just trying to downplay Red Bull? And when it comes to Melbourne and when it comes to race day, the Max Verstappen effect comes out in full flow, and out of nowhere he gets a victory, for example.
Maybe not a victory, but it's certainly in the mix for a podium. Yeah, I think it's tactical. It's what all the teams do, isn't it?
Sandbagging from Max Verstappen and simply just downplaying it, clearly. Let's move on to Jack Doohan. Obviously, I could talk about Oscar Piastri in this segment about Australia, but I'm not going to because he's already experienced his debut race at home. But let's talk about Jack Doohan. Sort of a forgotten man when it comes to Australia. We obviously did that episode with Shanna, with Formula Shanna not a while back, talking about all the advertising for Australia, and Jack Doohan looks to be a forgotten man. Looks to be not be Australian. Looks to be from somewhere in Europe. Um, why do you think that is? Why the Australian media, maybe even the kind of race organizers, why are they not promoting Jack Doohan as much as they are Oscar Piastri, for example? Is it because he's a rookie and he's likely not to be in the mix for a victory, for example? Or is it just because maybe his time in Formula One is numbered and it could be technically his first and only race in Australia that he drives in?
I don't know. It is strange. You would have thought being, essentially a rookie, he's done one race in Formula One, but being an Aussie as well, you'd have thought that for the Australian Grand Prix, the first race of the season, they would do a bit more. Obviously, they're going to look at Oscar Piastri. He's the focal point. He could be in contention for the win. Certainly, he should be standing on the podium. But it is a bit weird that they've not included Jack Doohan in any of the promotional, in any sort of promotion. I don't know. I really don't have an answer, to be honest.
It rather is strange though that they've not done anything around Jack doing. It's simply bamboozling. Before I do a little bit of a weather update and become a bit of a weatherman, let's talk Drive to Survive. Why not? Ethan, have you had chance to watch Drive to Survive? Are you a keen Netflix owner watching Drive to Survive?
I don't think I've watched the last three seasons. I've seen a lot online about it, and I've seen a lot of people criticizing it. It's particularly their portrayal of a certain team principal, who's been accused of some very bad things, and the way they're portraying him as a victim. So I don't really have an interest in watching it.
You must have seen online that though that they had a lot of missing things. For example, Behrman and Jeddah, they didn't really put anything of note regarding Ollie Behrman's debut.
Well, I've also heard that there's a Mercedes episode which focuses on particularly around Spa. And they fail to mention actually the fact that George Russell was disqualified from that race, and they make it out as if
Yeah,
he won.
it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense, especially when you're trying to portray a full season in 10 episodes. I know it's very hard to, get everything in, but surely things like, especially regarding the disqualification, surely it's important that the Formula One fans know, especially the ones that love watching Drive to Survive, know that George Russell didn't actually win the race, and it was Lewis Hamilton that stepped on the top step of the podium technically. It doesn't make any sense, does it?
It doesn't. It doesn't, and that's one of my issues with the show is that there's so much drama already within the sport that they don't need to. They don't need to fake it. They don't need to sort of look at it from the wrong angle. They can just portray it how it is, and that's one of my issues with the series. It doesn't show an accurate reflection of the sport at times.
So yeah, obviously they missed a lot of key things. I've only got a handful. They obviously missed Behrman in Jeddah, like I mentioned. They they failed to mention Franco Colapinto being at Williams for the last couple of races of the season, which again it bamboozles me. There's obviously be footage of the Williams car going round and round and round and round, right? But they failed to mention Colapinto being in the seat at all. People could still think that Logan Sargent is in that seat. They obviously, like you said, failed to mention Lewis Hamilton being handed the victory in Spa after George Russell's disqualification. Obviously, towards the latter end of the series, they fail obviously to mention Perez being out of a Red Bull seat. There's nothing of note of that. It's hard, when they're trying to pull in new fans and they're missing so many key things. It just bamboozles me of Formula One just being this sort of drama show, which it isn't. It's being portrayed as a drama show, but it's because of Drive to Survive. There's probably many fans out there that love Drive to Survive and would probably disagree with us. But Drive to Survive is more or less being just about drama, and Formula One just having this whole sense of, just pop stars and, just it's weird. What is your take, Ethan, on Drive to Survive as a whole? Like, I think when it started, it's something that excited Formula One fans, but now it's just becoming this whole big drama show, and it's being just everything's just being just put out there and just over, kind of gone over the top a little bit at times.
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. It's the whole they're dramatizing the parts that don't need to be dramatized, and they're not sort of given the proper um, justice to things that do happen. I th It's difficult in such a limited series when there's only sort of 8 to 10 episodes. But this is the trouble I have with it. I think it's fantastic at introducing new people to the sport, but for those people who really love the sport, pay attention to it and follow it consistently, it's outlived its purpose almost. And that's a shame because it'll be fantastic for what it is. Um, but yeah, like I said, I've got issues with the way it portrays certain things, which is why I haven't watched the last few series.
Yeah, it is strange. It's a weird one. I'm going to turn into a little bit of a weatherman ahead of the Australian Grand Prix. And I'm sensing, and I'm gonna stick my finger in the air. There's a little bit. There's a 45% chance of rain in Australia for the race on Sunday. It's partly cloudy for Friday and Saturday practice and qualifying, but for the race, it could be exciting. We could have rain in Australia for the first time in God knows how long. I can't remember last time we had rain in Australia. Um, Ethan, a spanner could be thrown into the mix here. We could have some rain on the radar. Um, but do you think that the rain could flip anything on its head when it comes to the final results on Sunday, or do you think the rain's not going to play anything, not going to really play a part in it, especially if it even rains, because it might not even rain. There's less than a 50% chance of rain, so it might not even come.
Yeah, I think it's more likely to affect Saturday than Sunday. So we might have a wet qualifying, which will be interesting to see. See how the drivers cope with that and who can get their lap time together at the right time. But I don't think it's going to affect the race from what I've read about it.
One last bit of housekeeping actually is popped into my mind. But the FIA Motorsport Council have announced that the Monaco Grand Prix will be a mandatory two-stop race. So I read the news. I think it was day one of testing where it was actually announced that Monaco will become a two-stop race instead of that one stop, throwing a little bit of another spanner in the works. Um, I know I know obviously Monaco is in Formula One terms a long way away. But Ethan, what do you make of a change to seeing Monaco become a two-stop race instead of a one-stop race? Do you think that yet again it's not going to make much of a difference, or do you think that the pit stops could become more crucial than ever and kind of it may throw some spanner in the works?
No, I think it's going to add a whole new dimension. I think it's going to add a more tactical approach to it. It's about how you use strategies because before you could run the hards for 50 laps and stick on the mediums for the front runners because there's so much conserving going on. Essentially, the guy in first dictates the tempo. They can look after their tires as much as they want without really a threat of being overtaken. So now this whole dimension about there having to be two pit stops, it really adds a little bit extra to the racing. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think two stop races always tend to be the best. So now we could see a little bit more of a tactical approach, which will be I think will add to the excitement of the Sunday.
Let's move on to our predictions ahead of the Australian Grand Prix. Ethan, why don't you kick off and give me your first two star predictions of the season?
So my first two I've got for Pierre Gasly points, and I've got for either a VSC or a safety car in the race.
Okay, nice and straightforward. And for myself, I've gone for a red flag. We've seen a numerous amount of red flags in Australia in the last couple of seasons, and I think this will be another race where we see the red flag being waived. And I've gone with rookie points, right? I know it's very vague, and obviously Liam Lawson and Kimi Antonelli are in top teams, but I'm actually going for rookie points from the drivers that aren't in the top team. So either Isaac Hadjar, Bortoleto, Behrman, or who have I missed? Or Doohan. Those four drivers. I'm not counting Lawson and Kimi Antonelli because as soon as I said that prediction, I saw Ethan's face and he was just like, "Well, yeah, there's Lawson and Kimi Antonelli who are obviously going to be guaranteed nailed on points." But no, one of those four drivers to get into the points of Hadjar, Behrman, Bortoleto. and Doohan, one of those four drivers. So let's move on to qualifying. And for qualifying, I've gone for Lando Norris to take pole position. The first pole position of the season for Lando Norris will be claimed in Australia. I've gone with Leclerc and Hamilton in second and third. I think the Ferraris are likely to have a field day. And I think if what happened in 2024 comes to fruition, 2025 could be another good sort of race in Australia for the two Ferraris. I've gone for Piastri in fourth, and then I've gone for Verstappen in fifth.
I've gone for Lando Norris to claim pole position as well. I've gone for Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, Oscar Piastri, and then Lewis Hamilton wrapping up the top five.
And then on to the race, I've gone with Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton to take a 1-2-4 Ferrari. I see Norris dropping down to third. I see Piastri retaining his fourth place. But I see Max Verstappen dropping out of the top five. And that is why I put a red flag. I do see his car going kaput at some point, or he crashes, and I've propelled George Russell into fifth place.
I've gone for Lando Norris to claim victory, gone for Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton on the podium, and then Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen wrapping up the top five.
Well, that was a short and sweet one. It rounds off episode 8 of On the Grid podcast, our Australian Grand Prix preview. Thank you, Ethan, for joining me. We'll be back next week looking over the Australian Grand Prix. We're hoping it's an exciting one. In the meantime, make sure you're listening, engaging in all of our social medias. Like I mentioned, we'll be back next week reviewing the Australian Grand Prix. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.